It's recorded.
Welcome to the companion planting presentation. Thank you all for being here. I'm Donnie Nolan. Real quick, I work at George Mason. I run our greenhouse and gardens program where we have a hydroponic aquaponics greenhouse, food forest, permaculture garden, and many other sites we do. But I'm not presenting. I'm going to introduce to you our speaker, Stephanie Johnson. So she actually owns her own company called Steeze. She started studying conservation and landscaping, decided there weren't enough good paying jobs in that field. So she just made her own job and made her own company. She focuses on native habitat and green living. Her educational background is actually in business technologies and environmental studies from both Virginia Tech and Northern Virginia Community College. She's certified also as a Chesapeake Bay landscape professional and is an active Prince William County master gardener and community educator. Stephanie has also established a tree stewardship program in Northern Virginia where she promotes, supports, connects volunteers, and has a native sapling rescue and replanting program in many areas of Virginia. She's also an urban farmer specializing in small spaced food production, one of my favorite topics, using hydroponics and containerized systems. She's also a proud mom of 4, true native, born and raised in Prince William County, Virginia. Let's put our hands together and welcome Stephanie Johnson.
Thank you guys. Thank you for being here. So we're going to talk about companion planting today. And it's interesting because when I was asked to do this, my first thought was companion planting vegetables. So I was kind of putting that thought process together, and then I'm like, wait a minute, I don't think that's what they mean. So here, you know, we have a lot of, we had a lot of native plants that basically came from communities, you know, just like we have our own communities, they had theirs. And our communities have changed over time. So basically these plants evolved, you know, due to the way the soil was, the way the moisture was in the soil, elevation and different factors. But now things are a little different. So we're going to talk about some of those differences and how we kind of combat them in our own habitat landscaping. So we pretty much have, can everybody hear me first of all? Are you guys good in the back? Okay. I'm not the greatest projector. So we pretty much have, you know, 2 types of properties now in Northern Virginia, unless you're lucky in your own farm. But we have, you know, older disturbed sites, and then we have the newer disturbed sites. But when we think about native plants and, you know, what kind of goes together, we have to consider the fact that we are not in a native landscape. We have a lot of different landscapes now. So these are our typical plant communities now. Heavy invasive pressure. So if you guys can see that, I mean, lots of invasives, and these are all properties that I've worked on. So if there's any of my clients in the online or in the audience, you know, don't hate me for this. But you know, this is what we're working with, and pretty much every time I go to a property, everyone thinks that they have the worst conditions, and I'm like, trust me, I've seen it all. But that's the biggest plant communities that I'm seeing now. We also have what I like to call the builder took it all, where they have knocked down every single tree. Not only did they knock down the trees, but they took away all of the topsoil. And there's really nothing left but that sublayer of clay, which nothing wrong with clay. Clay is still a good soil, but it's a little difficult for some plants. And then, you know, they kind of just plop trees in. I get a lot of properties where it's just tree too deep in the ground, surrounded by grass, and then everybody's like, what's wrong with my tree? It's not doing well. We also have what I like to call awkward hills. And it's you know, just kind of, they want to keep the water away from foundation and you know, issues like that. And you just kind of have these weird elevations that don't really occur naturally. and they're usually covered in grass or something invasive. So down there, that's me cutting still grass at the end of the season before it goes to seed. And that's what you have on these hills, unfortunately. Here, this one's a little bit harder to decipher, but we have a lot of erosion issues. So I called this the epic stormwater management fails. And usually this is like some of the older properties that over time, they've had a lot of issues with erosion, and it's changed how the landscape functions. But it creates conditions that are a bit challenging for the homeowner, not necessarily for the plants. We've got a lot of plants that like that type of condition. But it changes the function of the property. Then we have what I like to call a broad at home. And it's just like a lot of foreign plants that everyone thinks looks great, but doesn't exactly work in a habitat. Like the one on the right here, that one won an award for like the best landscape, and yeah. This one, you know, I like to call this the microclimate mixtomania. So basically, we have a lot of properties that, you know, one area of the property is very sunny and dry, and then other areas of the property are very shady and wet. You have like all these weird microclimates, and you have to find plants that work in each one. So often they're putting in plants that like may work in one side, but it's not working throughout the landscape. So you have a lot of failures. So we're going to talk about that and what could go in there. And then we have just soilless. You know, there's no opportunity really. There's no soil to work in, just a lot of hardscape, a lot of surface area that is, you know, it isn't permeable. It can't drain, water can't drain through, can't plant plants in, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. It doesn't mean that you can't create green space. So, observation. We talk about observation a lot in permaculture, but observation is really important in landscaping as well. And it's something that doesn't happen very often. Often we'll come in and be like, oh, yeah, plants, and then, or just kind of go crazy at the plant cells, right? I think everybody's done it. But basically, there's a lot of things to consider before you pick these plants. And although there are a lot of plants that go together, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have these considerations already. So basically, you know, you got to find out what kind of soil you have, what's going on your property. And in different areas of your property, like we showed before, you might have different types of soil. You know, how much sunlight are you getting? Because that really dictates upon what kind of plants you can put in there. I like to say putting, you know, plants in the right place, right plant, right place, right? Rain, which we haven't gotten a whole lot of. The way that stormwater runs through a property, you know, you have to know what's happening on that property, because some of the biggest failures that I see, and like people go, what's happening here? It's just that there was no real plan. So they're kind of just putting plants in that, you know, they are native plants, but these particular plants don't like these conditions. And then also, oops, did we go ahead? There we go. What type of plants are currently there? Whether or not they are invasive plants, foreign plants, whether they are native, non-native, you know, hybrids of whatever, you know. It's important to know because you have to know how to interact with that space. And the erosion is a big deal. And it's one of those that I see often, like I would say weekly, that I work on properties that have issues with erosion. Square footage. Square footage becomes important because when you are trying to create a budget for your project, you need to know what you're working with and have a good idea, because you'll be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do this whole backyard, and it's like you need like 10 yards of, you know, soil. You don't have topsoil. You need to bring in compost, condition it, or whatever. So the square footage is important to know, because by the way, 10 yards of compost is like over $1,000. And then like what cleanups are needed, you know? Often I'll go into properties where it's like, yes, we can make this beautiful, but it's gonna take a long, like we have to work at this for a while. There is no instant, like when you have things that are Japanese honeysuckle, that's not an instant cleanup. And that's something that you're going to be battling for a while if it's well established. And then utilities, I was just talking about one of these. If you have utilities under an area that you want to put a bed, sometimes it's not a good idea. Because if they need to access those utilities, they might have to destroy your garden. I've definitely gone into properties where we've had to take out plants and like make a hospital for them, kind of, where we like put them in pools and like kiddie pools and all kinds of stuff to try to save them, because they have to come in and fix septic and fix all of these issues. So it's really important to know. And also, you know, sometimes you have a cleanup that's on utilities. Like I have a bamboo project right now that's on top of a gas line. So that's fun. So one of the biggest things that I talk about is like your intent and your communication. We're going to get into plants. Don't worry, we're getting there. When we are designing for habitat, it's really important that we are communicating what it is that we're designing for, right? And a lot of people are really not with this. A lot of people are like, I'm going to go in, I'm going to do what I want. I don't care what my neighbor thinks, yada, yada. But in fact, it's really important what your neighbor thinks, because we want your neighbor to do the same thing, because we want to create habitat. And unfortunately, your property is not big enough to support the type of habitat that we need. But like most of the properties that we have now are private land. They're either, you know, residential or commercial, it's all private land. So without being able to connect those properties to create bigger habitat, we don't really, it's not a big enough Band-Aid to put on the issues. So it is important that we're communicating with our neighbors. And I actually have areas that have become my neighborhoods in a sense, because I started working with people in that neighborhood, and then they said, hey, you know, can you come to my property and do that? I really like these plants that I'm seeing. I really like those butterflies that I'm seeing. And those usually get them, the butterflies, you know, and the hummingbirds. That's usually how we get in there. So one of the biggest things that I do when I'm going into an area where we want like a habitat garden is putting in borders. And that's kind of, this is a mid-project picture that you're seeing. So we haven't gone in and done cleanup or plantings yet, but we put in border. And the border says to your neighbors, this is intentional. I meant to do it, all right? This isn't just weeds over here. So also, you know, identifying what your landscaping priorities are. Some people just want something nice to look at. Some people say, hey, I want habitat, right? But then I'm like, are you cool with snakes? No? All right. So, you know, are mice an issue? You know, not everybody's okay with everything, you know, so you have to plan for that. And how you design your habitat is really important to have that good function and understanding of what those priorities are. HOAs. So when I was under the supervision of HOA, I used to like hate the idea of HOA, but now, and as I've been in landscaping, I actually really like HOAs, because HOAs, if you get them on your side, HOAs make a big difference in the type of habitat that you can create in a neighborhood, and a much bigger difference than just working with, you know, one client, one person in the neighborhood. Budget. So I threw out a number for you, right? Like budget is really important, whether or not you're doing a DIY job or you're doing it all yourself, or, you know, you call somebody like me to come help you. Budget is really important. Most people do not want to give you a budget, right? They don't want to do it because they feel like you're going to pick the max of my budget, but that's not the case. And I like to think about this like, if you were designing like a wedding reception, you could do it in the backyard. You know, you could go to a destination wedding. It's all designed. What are we designing for? Because that really matters in the budget. So I will tell you that most installations right now, like in today's costs right now, are around like $4,000 starting. It's expensive. It's expensive paying people. It's expensive getting all the plants. The plant costs have gone up crazy. Getting all the materials that you need are expensive. So if you're doing it yourself, you have some, you know, cost savings there, But it's going to be a lot of work. We talked about function a little bit, the aesthetics, right? Like, do you really want it to be a walled space, or do you want it to be like tiered and very pretty and appealing? And pretty and appealing is not a bad thing, because if it's pretty and appealing to you, it might be pretty and appealing to your neighbor. You know what I mean? And then maybe we can get that neighbor to put in habitat gardens as well. Maintenance. So often gardens are planted, and I'm going to give you a commercial example of this, right? Down, hope VDOT doesn't get mad at me. Down Route 1 in Woodbridge, like near 123, kind of that intersection, there's a really long stretch where they have put in native plants. And if I had designed it, I think I would have done it a little differently, because the maintenance that is required for this space is really heavy and expensive. So they didn't put the money into the maintenance. So then it got overgrown. And then they call like, hey, can you fix it? And it's like, this is going to cost you big time. And there's no budget for that. So it's important to know that, like, what is this going to take care of it? If you're doing herbaceous gardens, those are more expensive to take care of than if you were like trying to maintain shrubs or trees. But trees can get really expensive too. Once the trees get really big, and let's say that they need pruning or they're damaged, etc., like calling in the arborist costs money, So thinking about these things ahead of time. I'm drilling that in, okay? All right. So let's talk about, so these are full sun plants, okay? And the first, anytime I have a full sun area that, for example, used to be like a turf area or something, my first thought process is going to go to plant trees. As you heard from the previous examples and talks, that planting trees are really, really important. Here I've listed some plants that are more tolerant to disruption. So basically, they are able to kind of go into soils that are not so great and be okay. So, with like the pines kind of create their own area though. They can become a little bit of a monoculture. Red maples as well. These are all kind of pioneers, so they're really good at being prolific. I'm often digging up a lot of these and donating them, because they can't all come up in the spaces that they're in. Over here where it says second choice, this is kind of a go-to for me. I really love this tree. Shadblow serviceberry. It's or some people call it like a Canadian serviceberry. It's an understory tree that can handle sunlight. We don't have a whole lot of understory trees that can handle sunlight. But it produces berry, it's a good pollinator. It's actually a host for a couple of butterflies. So it's a good tree to have. And in a landscaped area, especially residential areas, we can't always put in a big tree. Sometimes we have to pick something smaller. So that's a good pick if you're in sunlight. Witch hazels also can handle more sunlight. So that's another one that I like to go to. Okay, so here we're getting into kind of the meadow plants. So most people call me for meadows, right? Because meadows are very flashy and colorful. Look at all these cool plants that go in meadows. And this is by far not an exhaustive list of plants. These are just kind of plants you can find locally. A lot of plants, we'll talk about, and I've attended a lot of meetings where we talk about plants that like nobody can find them anywhere. And particularly right now, there's a real, it's really tough to get some native plants. Sometimes I have to go all the way to Pennsylvania to get native plants because there's a high demand. It's a good problem. It's a good problem to have. So these are some of the stuff that can handle drier conditions. I don't know. I think part of that is kind of blocked off, but these plants are dry to medium. So when we're talking about, oh, you can't hear me? Sorry. When we're talking about soil moisture, these can handle drought. So these are good for not just meadows, but like if you get those weird spaces where you have the full sun hills, some of these plants can work on those full sun hills. In particular, I like to point out one that I really love, which is the mountain mint. Pollinators love mountain mint so much, and it just fills you with joy watching them. It becomes like a highway. In the summertime when it's blooming, it's just like moving, it's just flowing. Everybody's in it, right? And you just go and hang out with it, and nobody's bothering anybody. They're just all it's just nectar for all. So that's a really good plant to have. But it is one that you have to check. So like if you plant it, what I do is on properties with mountain mint, I like in around March or so, I go in and I cut runners. And we donate those usually to other properties. But if you don't cut the runner, like if you have the space and you can just let it take over, cool. If not, you want to cut the runners. The runners will come up every spring and they will spread. It's a mint, you know, they will spread. But we're gonna do questions at the end, but it's not as bad as like some of the herbal mints that we're used to. It doesn't do all the crazy self-seeding all over the place. So in this one, so these are kind of plants that like medium soil moisture. So it's not wet, but also not dry. They're not always as drought tolerant per se. They really need some moisture. So first we're talking about some of these understory trees. And these are, I mean, so like the French tree, this is one that everybody likes in landscaping because it's just so pretty in the spring. It's pretty gorgeous. It needs both male and female in order to create berries. So if you don't have that, then you don't have the berry creation for the birds and stuff. So just something to think about if you're going to plant that one. Sassafras comes up all over the woods. It's pretty prolific and it's a really nice plant to look at. So if you have kind of a woodland design, it's really beautiful. The red buds are always gorgeous, really prolific, always throwing out more. If you have one red bud, you'll have a whole lot forever. You'll have good succession. You can send some to your friends, like you'll have enough. Oops, switched over. And then, okay, so dogwoods. Let's talk about that for a second. So dogwoods are, you know, our state tree, right? They are actually moving north because it's gotten so warm from them that they're not thriving here anymore. So I hate to say that maybe one day they might not be our state tree anymore, but for now, bluebirds really like this tree. And I'm still planting it and hoping for the best because you want to give them an opportunity to change, you know, and you can't do that if you don't have that opportunity. Downy serviceberry, very similar to the other serviceberry, just kind of a little different structure. This viburnum I really like, the arrowwood viburnum, because it's more of a medium moisture. It's kind of tough, whereas another one that we find very locally, I can't remember the name of it right now. You probably know what I'm talking about. The deer browse on that one a little bit harder. So speaking of deer browsing, so the strawberry bush we really like because it's just gorgeous, but the deer also really like it. So if you have a property that has a lot of deer coming in, it's all on how you look at it. It's habitat. They were here first. You know, if you're okay with them eating it, then you know, but you might want to protect that plant. So ironwood, ironwood hornbeam, I put that one on here because I noticed that it doesn't move very well in the nurseries. Like in the native plant nurseries, they usually have it. And it's a nice tree, you know. No, I don't think people know it's a cute tree that you can use. It's not as popular, it's not on all the blogs. Hazelnuts. So hazelnuts have gone through some stuff, you know. But there are you know, people that are working to kind of restore this tree and have more hazelnuts. So threw that one on there too. Okay, so still in our medium soil, so our, you know, moist, not wet. but also receiving part sun. So there's a lot of asters that really like this condition. One thing to know about asters though, and not all asters, but like the prolific ones that we see in our wooded areas, it's a real challenge when you have those and also stilt grass. So if stilt grass is a problem on your property, just know that it's going to be high maintenance for you. They play so nicely, you know, they're such a nice plant, and the stilt grass is not as nice. So it's going to be all around it, up under it, not, you know, so you're going to have a lot of pulling if you have a stilt grass problem. The blue mist flower I really like. I like seeing that one. It's gorgeous. Does really well on its own. You don't have to really do anything. Christmas fern is one of my favorites that I like to use to make things look pretty. Sometimes we have to make it look really pretty, right? And it's a evergreen. They call it, I think it's called a semi-evergreen, but it's, so we're having conditions that keep it very evergreen. And it's a very forgiving plant. And doesn't require like a whole lot of moisture, where a lot of ferns are a little bit more moisture loving. I can't do every plant because we won't get through this presentation, but these are really nice. And there are a lot of characteristics that would work in a medium moisture property. So this is talking about our wet soils, right? And so usually, like I said, these are not typically the newer developments. Usually these are on the older developments, but sometimes on the new properties, you have a lot of storm water that comes down and they haven't really allotted for where it's going to go. So often like the builder will just let it drop directly below the house. And really you need to be at least 10 feet away. Like that water should be routed at least 10 feet away from the foundation. And often it's not. So these are plants that really work in that. And often you hear about like, you know, rain gardens. And that's just kind of trying to combat all of this water. But these are plants that really like it. And there's a whole lot of native plants that really like those conditions. So explore Singa. You'll find a lot more. Some of these can handle really wet feet as well. Like the common rush over there, right-hand corner, that one really can handle some water and will not tolerate drought at all. So those are really good in areas where maybe if your property swales and you have water that's collecting. By the way, if you have any water that's sitting for longer than 48 hours, that needs to be addressed. Just planting isn't good enough. Okay. And some of these, you know, we'll purposely use in swales. So like the ironweed, lobelias, stuff like that. You know, these are really good for wet properties. Sensitive fern is nice because it's one that will kind of spread itself around. Now with the river oat grass, it's really prolific. So if you put that one in, just know it's there forever. It's also gonna have a lot more. You're gonna have a whole lot of it. And so as soon as you see more popping up, if you don't want it there, go ahead and dig it out and give it to a friend, you know, or donate it. It can't be in the area that it's in, because once it's in there, it's a tough dig. So when we're talking about companions, we can't forget to talk about our walnut trees, right? A lot of people say that they can't grow anything under walnuts because walnuts put out the juggalo. So they don't like to hang out with everybody. We'll just put it like that. They don't like to hang out with everybody. They have particular folks that came from their plant community that they want to hang with, right? A lot of vegetables will not grow anywhere near these plants, like within like 50 to 80 feet of these plants, of these trees. But there are a whole lot that will. So I put this link here because I felt like that was the best list that I've ever seen, actually. Now, there are some non-natives on that list. There are some that I would not suggest to put in there, but they do have a pretty good list of plants that will grow if you have walnut trees. So we talked about those spaces that are really have no green space. You know, sometimes you have a balcony or a deck or, you know, and you really just don't have any green space, but you can create green space. You can use containers to create green space. Plant Nova Natives had a really good article about container gardening with natives. And so I listed that there as a good option. Now this one has, you know, this one has a hybrid in it. Okay, it's a cultivar. Okay, but the Christmas fern behind it is not. But you know, these are, if you have just a space that, you know, water just hitting it and it's going nowhere, you know, why not put a pot there and have something green that can absorb some of that water, filter some of that water before it goes into your storm system. And then also you can help to raise trees. So we talked about that I have a sapling program, and I'm not the only one with a program. There's a lot of programs in Northern Virginia that are supporting saplings. And you don't need a big space to do that. We use like tubs, like the storage tubs, and we put them in pots in the storage tubs. So when they get like a couple of feet, they're ready to be planted on properties, and then we donate them to other programs so that they can be planted on properties. So you don't need a whole lot of space in order to create green space. Good.
No.
Okay. So like right now, I have volunteers that are supporting this program. So if this is something that you're interested in, let me know. And basically what we're doing is, while we're landscaping and maintaining properties, there are trees that are coming up, saplings that are coming up all over the place. And they come up in places that they really just can't be in. Utility lines, all kinds of stuff, like they'll never be able to mature here. So we dig them out in the spring and in the fall, and volunteers pot them up, and they what we call foster them, but they foster the trees until they've gotten to a certain height. And then most of our trees actually go to small trees make big canopies program in Arlington. We have really good relationships with them, and they do an amazing job taking care of trees and rescuing trees. And then, you know, if you have an HOA, if you have a big space that needs to be filled, like there's a lot of trees that you can get for free without spending a whole bunch of money.
Stop.
Yeah,
Here, man.
we're good. Okay. Nope. Mm-mm.
Oh yeah, just exit out of that thing.
Are you able to? No.
Yeah, exit out of that box. The participant closed captioning box.
All right, I'm just gonna keep talking. So, and then in the last presentation, you got to hear a lot about how plants can have sensitivities and send out chemical signals. Those chemical signals are really strong with native plants. We lose that a lot with our vegetables. Vegetables come from hybridization. We change them over, and they're literally a creation, changing over and over. And they don't always have this ability to communicate when they're stressed out, to, you know, bring on predators, etc. So often when you plant native plants with your vegetables, it can support your vegetable garden. There's also plants that can be used as trap crops. So for example, golden Alexandria is in the is in the same family with umbels. So like, you know, there's a really cool, you know, caterpillar that likes to eat parsley and stuff like that. And you can plant this, and you know, with it, they'll go after that. They'll eat on it, and you know, you still have two cool plants. The other three there, these are nitrogen fixing plants. You can't see that, but they're nitrogen fixing plants. These are all in the legume family. So for example, if you're planting,
What does that say under there where the black part is covering it?
yeah, nitrogen fixing.
Nitrogen
Fixing. Yeah.
here.
So basically they have the ability to, you know, in the bean family, they take, it's not even make that easy. They take kind of store, sorry, I don't know how to make that easy, but basically they are nitrogen fixing plants. And if you are doing vegetable gardening, you can use them in the same instance that you would companion planting legumes.
They make atmospheric nitrogen available to plants.
I don't know what's happening.
Next slide.
And then it's okay. So also we have fruit that are native here. They're a little hard to get right now, but you can still get them. So for example, pawpaws, which is the biggest fruit that we have in North America. You'll find those around the fall time. There's a lot of festivals. If you're going to like the Maryland Festival, you gotta get your tickets now. It's a really, really popular fruit at this point. Some cool blogs went out, right? Everybody got excited about it. And there's a lot of developed cultivars, hybrids of pawpaws. And this is for human production, human food versus like, you know, how we find it naturally. They've changed the fruit quite a bit and it's really good actually. But something to think about, because when you're talking about hybridizing native plants, you don't know how you're changing them. So if in this instance, if you're growing it for yourself, it's not that big of a deal. If you're growing it for habitat, I would say just plant the straight native. The blueberries, so we have both high bush and low bush blueberries. They are actually not that easy to find right now, and a little bit expensive, but put in really good fruit production. And if you plant enough of them, then you get some, and the birds will let you have some.
How long does it take?
If you're getting a shrub that is already, you know, got some height on it, like if you get a sapling like this, is going to take a long time. But if you get one that's already got some height on it, sometimes it takes a couple of years to become established. You know, sometimes they'll surprise you and start fruiting early, but it just depends on how happy they are. They have to get their roots happy first. Persimmons, I'm not a huge fan of that taste, but some people really like it. These, the street native does grow kind of tall, and accessibility to that fruit can be kind of challenging. So if you're growing that for food production within your garden, then you want to think about that and kind of consider that like you would an apple tree or anything else where you want to be able to access those fruits. Another thing that I wanted to talk about there is hydration. So when we're talking about companion planting, we also have to talk about like how the garden works, right? So, you know, often it's not necessarily that all of these bugs and these animals, they were just really, really hungry and just wanted everything. Sometimes they're thirsty and they need moisture and they can't just, they don't have access to it, but your fruit has lots of moisture in it, right? So sometimes if you're able to provide water, that's an alternative than to just eating up your fruit. Not saying that they won't eat it. Are we okay? Can I? Good?
Yeah,
Okay. How are we on time? Okay, it's not moving anymore.
Got a mind of its own.
Had some help over here. So we're at the end. So I really wanted to allot for good Q&A. I think we're good, right? I don't know.
10 minutes after.
Oh. Okay. So does anybody have questions?
I did have one fast question, especially kind of in context, you talk about dogwoods. I'm from Georgia. I've only been up here a couple of years.
Yeah.
And all my, partners, friends like, oh, plant questions. I was like, let me see the zone. And the second zone is where I grew up. Just, older for longer. So to that question saying the dogwoods are just dying in Georgia. So my question is about the mountain mint you're talking about, using it as maybe like a ground cover. How is it fully herbaceous? Like you'll see it go all the way to the ground, or will some of it, unless there's like really bad freezes, will it make it stay year round?
So within the last few years, I have seen it the whole year. So it does, and let me be clear on that. It does die all the way back down and leave stems, which we leave, and we leave that. But you'll see it green on the surface while we are this one. And I was literally like the last few years I have seen it on the surface. I actually use mountain mint to fight invasives. So if you have like a really bad rhizomes or just plants that are vines that are spreading, sometimes it can be helpful. Because it really groups out and doesn't exactly let things grow within it. I don't have to weed it often.
I was thinking of it as like a ground cover, because like at George Mason, that's where I work at Fairfax campus, we can't really do clover and stuff, so maybe like a low growing mint that we could chop, it's never gonna have all the
I wouldn't
flowers.
call it low growing though, because it's gonna, it grows, you know. Yeah.
Isn't that one that you can actually take the leaves and use, crush them, and put them on your arm to keep mosquitoes away?
I mean, I've heard that, but I don't know the science if that's
Okay,
a
okay.
thing.
It may be
Yeah,
whole lifestyle. for
right,
them.
a lot of things, and you know, you
Yeah.
don't always know, but it is it's a mint and it's has the mint
And
smell.
that.
When I have to cut it, it's amazing, it's like the best day, you know? And it's a really wonderful plant, and last year we were just giving it out, because there's always so much of them.
What would be a good companion plant with ground mint? Like if you have a trouble area that has rhizomes of other invasives, what else will you put in there?
It's pick something that's really prolific, so choosing something that is dry to medium moisture and can really self-seed itself. Like, you know, black-eyed Susans, stuff like that, like they know how to take over an area.
We have a recommendation for a ground cover for both, for sloped areas.
Uh-huh.
But what we're trying to do is avoid mowing of any kind,
Yeah,
but a ground cover that would look good year round.
so looking good is for the eye of the beholder, right? Ground covers can be tough in situations like that, because you're talking about like a sunny area.
Well, it's most, it's part sun and part understory trees.
Yeah, a lot of the mixed things
Yeah,
going
in a
on,
mixed
right?
area.
Yeah,
And this is a church property that I'm talking about.
Okay.
So, I'm a volunteer helping with a church property, and they want to stop the mowing, but
Yeah.
they want it to look nice.
right, look nice, right?
No, meaning gold?
Yeah, I mean, if you're in a part sun location
Golden redwood.
and it's not exactly, because like green and gold doesn't work that well in elevated spaces,
Golden redwood?
but, and then that one's not really a
Moisture.
ground cover, because it does get some height on it, you know?
Here.
Yeah, that's a good look. Yeah, that's a good
What?
one. There's different types of calyxes that you can.
Carex is that
Yeah.
interesting. Is there a carex that is particularly good for this area?
We have a lot that are particularly good for this area. If you go to like, Earth Sanga's website, they have a really good list of the stuff that they're carrying. And the good thing about Earth Sangha is that they're local, so you know that it's gonna work out.
Oh, okay.
If you're planting something that you're like to eat,
Yeah,
how long do you have to keep it protected for it to get good and established before it's okay to let them munch?
so I'm gonna answer this personally from my own experience, and people may have had different experiences. But establishment takes 3 to 4 years, like for most shrubs, for most perennials, and I would say protect it for that period of time. Just allow it to get happy first before it gets nibbled up.
Thank you.
You mentioned the meadows, plant meadows for full sun. And I'd like to add some grasses
Mhm.
to mine, but I have a small yard, so I don't want an 8-foot tall grass. So what do you recommend in terms of grasses or rushes or anything like that?
So here's the thing, right? Because you're maintaining it, you're taking care of it, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be 8 feet tall. You know what I mean? But like, like the little blue stems, stuff like that, like you can plant that. But if you're in the garden, you're kind of managing how tall necessary, like for grasses, it's different, right? Because you can cut them. For woody plants, I wouldn't suggest that at all, because allow woody plant to grow to what it's gonna be. The more you try to cut them back and keep them small, like the worse they're gonna be. But for a grass, you can cut. So I wouldn't say it's that. Like grasses are really great for erosion because they put down really good, nice deep roots, but they're gonna stay. and the spot that you put them in. It's not fun taking grasses out. It's funny because our turf grasses, I mean, the roots are only going down but this much. They're not really helping with erosion. The sediment movement, yes, but like not really with erosion. When I take that out, easy, right? But when you try to take out any type of ornamental grass, I've had to use chainsaws on ornamental grasses. So. Yes, sir.
Oh, I had a question on dry shade under established big trees. Trying to get natives established in there has been a bit of a struggle because even after a couple of years, it seems like they're not really spreading. Things that are pretty good spreaders, but I don't know if there's. I mean, I know you're not really supposed to fertilize or anything like that, but is there anything to do to kind of encourage them to be happier?
So when we talk about encouragement in our gardens, right, it's really about maintaining the environment and you want to make alterations that are positive, right? So some of the questions that I would ask for a situation like this is, is it dry because the canopy is really large and kind of, stopping so much moisture? Because I've seen a lot of that. Is it dry because it's in an elevated space? Is it dry because it's getting a lot of sunlight? Like, what I mean? There's different questions I would ask for that. But in maintaining an environment, we're thinking about what's going to be best for the plants long term. So it's, using compost and, if you have to mulch, okay, fine. But like, there's, using plants as mulch, having topsoil that's created in the process of just the seasons. And once you have like good balance in that garden, then plants you typically will grow fine without you having to kind of manipulate the situation too much. But if it's dry, I would say just picking plants that are drier and just meet the conditions. And if you want to dig deep into this, there are plants that evolve together. There are really strong communities that evolve together, but it's a wormhole,
Speaking of that wormhole, like a resource that you recommend in terms of plant identification or directing your companionships?
So you said plant ID?
Plant ID or a companionship, like, you find something, you want to work with it,
Mm-hmm.
where do I go from
Where to
there?
deep dive?
Yeah.
So there's some good links. In fact, Earthsunga has some good links too on like the Messick Dry communities that evolve together. You can dig on that. There's a lot of people that have done really good studies. In master gardening, we like to say to use your EDU sites, right? So sites that come from research.
Sure.
I like that one too. I like how they put everything in one area. You can just get it easy, right?
With her tree question, wouldn't it possibly have to do with what tree is growing there? And do they have shallow roots that are interfering with what you're trying to grow?
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a lot of root competition versus, also because of the canopy.
Yeah,
too, but they're
yeah.
big trees.
And it's good to reduce the canopy some if you have storms that the wind can't blow through it, might knock the trees over.
Lots of different elements. When we're talking residential though, it's really tough to kind of figure out without seeing because there's so many challenges residentially. You don't know what your neighbor's doing. Often I'll get a property that's super duper wet and it's literally only because someone's downspout is like facing this way. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where it's like you have to kind of figure out what's going on within that particular property.
How about plants for a hill that it's difficult to mow?
Yeah. We hate mowing
Anything
hills, right?
recommended?
Yeah, so I would say on the list of like the dry, is it like sunny or is it shady?
About half.
Oh, that's fun. I mean,
Yeah, morning sun.
yeah, you might need to design that one. So whether or not you needed a design is a good question in itself, whether you need to like really design a space. Because if you're dealing with a property that has these like mixed microclimates, it's really tough to just be like, one plant, two plants. It's not gonna work that way. You have to really plan out which plants to put in. So if you're having an area that is dry, you have to use plants that are for those particular types of environments. If you have an area that has moisture, you got it, right plant, right place. I can't particularly say this is gonna work.
Rid of, English ivy. This
Oh,
is
yeah,
hard.
yeah. English ivy keeps me very busy in the winter time.
It's the grass now. It's like-
Yeah.
It's off the house. I got it out of there.
We have had great success on properties where we have minimized English ivy. That had properties that had it really bad. We've minimized it. And when I say that, it's important to know that when you are removing invasives, you're not getting rid of them. You're not removing them forever. And the idea that you're going to remove it for, like, if you're holding on to that, it's a heartbreak long term. Because if you have it, your neighbor has it, it's all over the place, right? So all you can really do is manage that environment. But what we go in there and we dig it out, we dig it out. If it's going up a tree, we cut it at the soil level, and you gotta be careful too with English ivy, because it's never the vine that you can see. It's never the one that you see going up the tree that's like the main vine. They're really sneaky. Like,
They want us to survive.
they're really sneaky, like they know how to live, right? So often I find them like they've rooted under the tree and you can't even access that area. Sometimes it takes some digging to even get anywhere near trying to cut it. So it's about the management really, but you can go out there and you can just dig it out.
Please keep cutting it back.
No, not cutting it out. You dig it out.
You dig
Yeah, dig it out.
Every time you see it, you yank it out.
Yeah.
Literally roll it.
Sometimes. Sometimes. We've had some carpet.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had some English ivy carpet. I was just talking about that the other day. I'm like, you could create all kinds of crafts with this, but it's just remember, any invasive problem that you have on your property, you're not gonna be the only one. There are properties that have like an open that like, this stilt grass is insane. Like, it seems like everybody has stilt grass in that area and you're not getting rid of it.
So, and then you dispose of the English ivy in the garbage, not.
I don't.
It doesn't go, where does?
So you can take
I'm
it,
not putting it in the compost, with the garden waste stuff where they go and they compost that.
well, maybe not in your compost, right? I mean, our home compost is not built for that type of thing, right? It's not getting as hot, but you can take it to a composting facility that's getting really hot and nothing's living, after
Oh, okay,
that.
so that will. so
You can
it's
take it, yeah.
Oh.
I take mine to a composting facility.
Oh,
Everything
I
can go
felt
back.
guilty about putting it in there, so.
Everything can go back to where it came from.
There's some online questions here about nitrogen fixing plants. I
Yeah.
noticed persimmon trees are one of them. Do you know of any nitrogen loving native ground covers to plant under persimmons?
That's a
Because
good
many
one.
natives don't need fertilization, and
Mhm.
wondering if there are some that actually prefer the nitrogen rich soil.
I don't know that I know the answer to that one. That's a good question.
What's the?
I mean, clover,
Also fixes that.
we have native clover, but it's not,
Is the groundnut native?
Groundnuts are native.
Yeah.
it's, the native clover is not, as easy to establish as the non-native clover, and it's not as accessible. So,
I didn't realize that persimmons were nitrogen fixers.
yeah, I've never heard that,
That
but
sounds
it could, I mean,
wrong.
I think they use them, they use them as, starter plants. Other trees for pawpaw trees. I think they use persimmon trees as starter tree plants for pawpaw trees.
I've also never heard that, because they're not related. So I don't know about that one.
It was on your slide on the nitrogen fixing plants and it had
It-
those and then underneath it had the pop-up plants.
That
So-
was, I'm sorry, that was different, but you couldn't see like there was a category. It's just being blocked off.
But it was, but
It's-
it mean that the
persimmon was a nitrogen fixing.
I don't know that persimmon is a night, I've never heard that before.
Well, that's not what it meant.
Yeah, so I cannot confirm or deny that one.
There were more online questions. One of them was about Passiflora in Coronata. Is it native to Virginia? It's really beautiful, but I never see it in nurseries, so I'm wondering if it causes issues.
I don't know that it causes issues, but I know it's sometimes a little bit harder to establish. But it is, I've seen it growing on properties where I've never, personally, I haven't seen it just growing native, but we do have a native. But usually someone has planted it, and I think often a lot of the plants, there's a lot of native plants that we can't deal with in nursery, like, because they're just more challenging. So, but I believe that one you can get without an issue.
I did mention that in the chat, but at GMU's Fairfax campus, our Innovation Food Forest, we have some of the hardy passion flower. It is really taken over our sunny area. I mean, it spreads the rhizome along the ground. So in late May, if y'all want, please come and dig some up. We've tried to bring them in pots and they never survive. Maybe that's why nurseries don't have them. They don't like to live in pots. So they're well established. There's in the Fairfax George Mason campus at our food forest. You can actually sign up to volunteer and come take some for free.
That's where I was thinking about this forest, because there's a guy and then.
There are a lot of native plants that just don't work, they don't work out too well in the nursery setting. You know, not everything can be potted. Some things have to go through a process. Some have to be burned, like it's, you know, there's a whole lot, so not everything can be kind of cultivated in a landscaping setting. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist on that property already. You know, sometimes when we clean out an area, we've taken out all of the honeysuckle. I still like honeysuckle when I was a child. It's, you know, it's, once you take it all out, then other things can thrive. So often you'll have good native plants that are already in the soil, they're in the seed bank, and you don't know what you're gonna get. So sometimes you clear it out and you'll get other bad plants. Sometimes you'll get good stuff. It's a mixed bag.
Someone's asking about pink mooly grass.
What's
What are
the
your
question?
opinions?
I like it. It's pretty. I would say it's taken on more of a ornamental use rather than habitat per se, but like birds can use it, you know. I like it. It's planted.
Is there anything you could suggest to plant, in like the edge of the wood area to compete with, stiltgrass?
To compete with stiltgrass?
To outcompete stiltgrass, I guess.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one, because it's still, so the problem with stiltgrass is that stiltgrass is seed, when it goes to seed, that seed is gonna stay in the seed bank for a very long time, probably 6 or 7 years. So like if you're trying to like really reduce that, it's about disrupting its seed cycle so that it's not making new ones, you know, it's just you're dealing with the old ones, right? But that's a challenging question. It is. And what would work would really depend on that particular environment. But you know, there's some stuff, because like on some woodland edges, you're getting some sunlight, and then on some, not so much. So it really kind of depends on that environment. But I would pick something that's just really prolific, that can hold its own, you know, in the woods. I maintain buffers as well, and in the woods, I mean, I love a prolific native, right? A lot of those kind of pioneer plants, like the pokeweeds, you know, a lot of people see that and they're like that, you know, but that's actually, when I see it in the woods, I'm like, yes, better than honeysuckle.
Wouldn't you think something with big, large basal leaves would help to cover the ground so that the seeds couldn't germinate as easily?
I mean, if the seeds are already there, then
Well, the seeds are already there, but if you pull a lot of the existing plants out and you get some natives in that end up with big basal leaves on the ground that covers the area, it would make it harder for the sun to get in for the seeds to germinate.
I don't know, I've seen still grass coming up in
Oh,
all
okay.
kinds of areas, even areas that are not receiving so much
Okay.
sunlight. It's a real pain.
I've had some success with jewelweed crowding out.
So jewelweed is one that
but
you're not gonna get in a,
Damn.
yeah, you're not gonna get jewelweed in a nursery setting most of the time because it's an annual. So what you can do is if you see, like if there's a property near you that's got jewelweed growing on it, you just go in there in the fall and just start collecting seeds. The seeds are really fun and you gotta be prepared for it because they pop out, like they kind of shoot out at you. And they're really small, so like you wanna go in there fully prepared, like big paper bag and collect it, but yeah, that's one you could use in a more moist environment. But getting it sometimes is a bit challenging.
You were talking about saving saplings and stuff
Yeah.
earlier.
Mhm.
So of our pawpaws at the Fairfax campus,
Mhm.
I never realized, but I thought they were spreading by rhizome.
Mhm.
So I tried to dig up a couple of those. And it's super stressed out the tree and I'm really hoping it's gonna be all right. It looks okay, we'll see, but all of the saplings died. I just had like no success with any of them. Potted them up that day, kind of babied them for
Well,
several
sir,
weeks.
I take them out just fine.
Yeah.
No, but it's about when you're collecting them too, right? So like, typically you don't want to be digging out pawpaws anytime before like September, like around October-ish, November, like when the garden's going to bed. If it does like this, I've been working nonstop the whole winter. If it goes to bed, right? Those are good times to take saplings out, and that's when I would get the pawpaws.
Wait till they're dormant.
Mhm.
Okay.
And then so under pawpaws, like, that's what the pawpaw patch, right? Pawpaws do create like a colony of their own trees. So like, you're gonna have some that are just shooting off, and you're also gonna have saplings that are coming up, but you need to identify which ones you have, because pawpaws are very specific about their pollination. And like, if you have plants that are clones, you're not, it's a lot harder to try to get some fruit from that.
I have a question to continue with the free trees.
Yeah.
I actually volunteer for Plant Nova Natives
Mhm.
and I run the free tree program for them. So I'd like to talk to you because I'm trying to get that off the ground.
Mhm.
I'm not able to, I'm just alone working on that.
Oh, okay.
So I'd like to like pick your brains, but I could, we can do it.
Yeah, Margaret has been in contact with me in regard to the sapling stuff, so definitely. Anybody who's interested in saplings, it's really, I would say saplings are really important because we need genetic diversity. So a lot of the trees that you're seeing in landscaping that are kind of plopped in all over the place, there's a requirement to put in a certain amount of native trees. It's not exactly a requirement to make sure that they are not a cultivar. And, you're getting once again, a mixed bag in landscaping, but there's a lot of clones in landscaping. And it's because it's a lot easier to produce from a clone than it is from seedling. A seedling takes a long time. With oaks, they grow, fairly pretty quick. So there's certain trees that will grow faster than others, but saplings, nobody really has the patience for them in landscaping because they take a long time. Everybody wants it instant. Give me that instant tree, but saplings, they have the genetic diversity that can strengthen their lines, so an example of that, like white ash. There's been a huge issue with ash, and you guys probably heard about the ash borers, etc. And there's also been research saying that, some of these younger trees have more resistance than the older trees.
They're also fruiting earlier.
So you have to give them an opportunity, right? And we are in a changing environment. I was burning up working yesterday outside, and I'm like, what is happening here? It's hot, it's ridiculous. So we are in a changing environment, and we don't really know how anything is going to interact at this point, but you have to give it a chance. You have to give it an opportunity to change with the environment or not. It's one of those things. We got to change too.
Yep, so we are out of
All right.
time. Lunch is right across the hallway. Thank you all so much for attending.
So, I got the eye, I think the words, yeah, that's okay, because I wanted to see how you're doing the two-week program. Kind of like, Margaret set it up. But,